Today's forum marks CMC's final event of 2016 and is the annual Harrison Smith Legacy and Civic Engagement Forum. We have a number of companies and organizations that we'd like to thank for their support today, including Smith & Hale, The Ohio State University, the Robert Weiler Company, Taft Law, Lusk Architecture, Edge Group, Katz Development, and the Whitman Company. Please help me in thanking them today. Our speaker today is nationally renowned urban expert Aaron Renn. Aaron first reported on Columbus's growing urban attributes at CMC back in 2010, so we're very interested to see and learn what he thinks about Columbus 6 years later. Aaron will start us off with some opening remarks, and then we'll sit down with Kyle for some conversation. So let's give a warm Columbus welcome to Aaron Renn.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for inviting me back to Columbus. It's great to be here. And it's great to be at the Columbus Metropolitan Club again. I can't believe it's been 6 years. Although I was here in 2014, I think it was, I came for a visit at Greenways project on the Scioto River that we just gave an award to. It was all tore up, completely under construction. So when I have more time and when the weather's a little warmer, I'm going to come back and check it. And also, I'm glad, the last one that we had was at the Athletic Club. And it was just a great venue. The Athletic Club is a great building. And now I'm just enjoying just like a fantastic view at this new venue. So very excited to be here as well. I originally grew up in Indiana. I'm from Indiana. And because of that, probably because of that, naturally, I've kind of always been a little bit of a fan of Indianapolis, a supporter of Indianapolis. And during the 2000s, which is when I started my site about cities, Indianapolis was the best performing city in the Midwest on jobs, population, et cetera. But in 2009, I actually put up a post where I said that Columbus was poised to become what I called the new Midwest star if it stayed on its current path and would probably overtake Indianapolis and become the best performing city in the Midwest, at least on a population basis, if nothing else. Well, if you fast forward to today, that's basically come true. So Columbus in the 2010s has been the fastest growing major region in the Midwest in terms of population. You are the number 2 fastest growing major city in the Midwest in terms of jobs behind Grand Rapids, which has really had some good things going on there as well. So you really have turned it on and are really, in a sense, leading the pack here. You've added about 115,000 people and 120,000 jobs just since 2010, which is great. On a percentage basis, that actually puts you kind of in the middle of the pack nationally. But in terms of this region of the country, you are killing it. You are killing it. And obviously, you got a lot going for you as a city, much of which you already know. The fabulous university presence, particularly with Ohio State. You're attracting, maybe because you've got that kind of college environment here a little bit, you've been very attractive to young, educated people. There are actually 40,000 more young people with college degrees in Columbus now than there were in 2000. So tremendous growth in that. That's probably fed into some of the incredible apartment boom and building boom that you've had here. Many of the marquee employers who come to town. And you've had a lot of things that you've done all along that have been very successful in your past. I think the Arena District's been very successful. This new Scioto Greenway, this new project you've done. And then the DOT Smart City Challenge, which is sort of a big win that will take you into the future. So you've had a lot going on. And frankly, you should feel good about it. You should feel good about it. And if I look at Columbus today, I would say there's really no barrier to recruiting people and businesses here in terms of the basics of quality of life and lifestyle that are more or less within your control. Now, there's always going to be people who you're not going to get for whatever reason. Somebody who just loves to ski, has to be close to the mountains. You're probably not going to get that person to want to move to Columbus. And then, to be honest, every city's got its own personality, just like corporations. Sometimes great company, great employee, there's just not a culture fit. You're going to find somewhere else. There's going to be people who don't resonate with here, but a lot of people are, right? And in terms of the basics of the things that you can control, good local business climate, low housing prices, culture, food, all of that kind of stuff, you basically have taken care of business, and I think you're attractive to a broad spectrum of people. I think your performance and the fact that you have done so well on so many points puts you in kind of a luxurious position that a lot of places in the Midwest and in Ohio really are not in, and that is to think about where you want to go next. Right? Where you want to go next as a city. What do you aspire to be as a city? Do you want to stay on kind of the path that you've been on, which is a pretty darn good path? It's an upward trajectory, right? Or do you want to try to bend the curve and aim even higher? Is that something that you want to do? And I ask that because, again, as I would say, you're really killing it in terms of leading the Midwest, one of the top performers. But when you look at kind of the numbers, you're sort of in the middle of the pack nationally, I would say. And so I think when we hear those kinds of stats, we say, gosh, I kind of like to be at the top of the pack. I'd like to be the top 10. I'd like to be top 5. I'd like to be number 1. That's how I feel, whenever I look at where I stand in the league tables. But a lot of times, the things that it would take to get there or to really make that are just not things that we really would want to do, right? Or the price can a lot of times be too high. And to kind of illustrate this, I'll talk about a couple of those things. If you think Nashville or Charlotte, if you talk to the people in places like Nashville or Charlotte, you listen to what they say, it seems pretty clear that they are very okay with the idea of being the next Atlanta. And by that, I don't mean being exactly like Atlanta, that they don't want to learn from Atlanta's mistakes, but this idea of being a gigantic national growth story is just very appealing to many of these southern cities. Well, I know you go over to Indianapolis or a lot of Midwest cities and say, hey, how would you like to be the next Atlanta? They're horrified. They're horrified by it. No, we would not like to be the next Atlanta. So Columbus, fairly recently reached a big milestone as a region, crossing over to be greater than 2 million people. That's a big deal for you. But you got to ask yourself, well, do we want to be 3 million? Do we want to be 4 million? Would you want to be a region of 4 million, even if you could? So I think those are things to ask. And a lot of the reasons people like to get jealous of, like Austin, Texas. Austin's the fastest growing major city in America. It's approximately the same size kind of class of region as Columbus. Everybody talks about the tech boom. It has a lot of street cred. And, I've spent a little time down in Austin this year, and I will say they got some problems in Austin from all of that growth. The traffic congestion in Austin's gotten pretty bad. They have a lot of infrastructure challenges in Austin. Housing prices have gone up a lot to the point where Austin is becoming an almost unaffordable city. I think the median home now is about 4 times the median income in the region. So it's starting to get into that unaffordability territory. And maybe more importantly, a lot of people in Austin are saying, hey, wait a minute. We're losing our soul as a city. The things that we liked about Austin, the things that brought us here, the music clubs and things like that, well, they're getting priced out by high rents, by development. The character of the city is changing, and it's changing in ways that they don't like. So they have sort of paid a high price for success. And I think that's something that, many of us can do. I'm struggling with it myself as I try to figure out where I want to go. I love Twitter. I got addicted to Twitter. And I've got a pretty good following on Twitter. I've got about 20,000 people following me on Twitter. I get a lot of Twitter engagement. And I look at it and I see, though, a lot of these trolls. And I see all these people and what they're doing. And you know what? They're getting massive, massive, massive attention. And they're influencing elections. And they're doing all this stuff. And it's like, man, why can't I be like the top guy on Twitter? But then I look at the kind of tactics that they use. I'm just like, you know what? That's not me. Is that really? Do I want to get out there and just start getting in constant wars with people, just to attract attention and controversy? And I don't know if that's something that really I want to do. personally. So maybe I need to be more like, where I'm at's actually pretty good. I have a pretty good following. I don't necessarily want to be, but so I struggle with it personally, how I want to do it. I think it's something to kind of think about as a city. Where, if you could draw out the future, where would you want to go as a city? I think it's an important thing because you have a lot of possibilities before you, and you're in a very good place today. So you have the luxury to think about where you'd like to go instead of fighting a bunch of fires, like other people are doing. But regardless of which way you choose, you are going to face some challenges and some things you're going to have to address and focus on as a city. And I'll just list a couple of these out, and I think Kyle and I will probably talk and dialogue a little bit more about them in the Q&A. But one of them is the big split between Columbus and the rest of the state in terms of performance. So there was a group, I think it was the Board of Realtors, put out this Insight 2050 study. It was a projection of population, housing unit demand up through 2050. And then it says Columbus is going to grow by about 500,000 people by 2050. That's a lot. The rest of the state of Ohio is going to shrink. So that is not a healthy situation to be in. That is not a healthy situation to be in. Secondly, and sort of a little bit related to that and a little bit related to the aspirational questions is, Columbus has been a big draw of people from within the state of Ohio, but has really not drawn people from outside the state of Ohio. And using an analysis of IRS tax return data, I basically estimate that between 2000 and 2014, Columbus drew, on a net basis, over 60,000 people from the rest of Ohio moved into the Columbus region, into the metro area. So that was a little less than 20% of the total growth here was people moving in from the rest of Ohio. Now, if you look at it, Columbus lost 27,700 people to the rest of the United States outside of Ohio. So that doesn't mean you lost with every single place. There are places like New York State that you drew from, but in aggregate, more people are migrating out to the rest of the country. So a lot of people have been moving in from Ohio. It's kind of an Ohio story. So how you feel about that and what you might want to do about that, if anything, I think is something to think about. A third one that's going to be a challenge for you relates to one of the things that made you successful. One of the keys, I think, that really gave Columbus a leg up is that unlike, say, Cleveland or Cincinnati, you were able to annex as a city. She became a very geographically large city. Well, a lot of the areas inside the city of Columbus are themselves basically suburban, and like many similar areas around the country, are starting to age. They're starting to age a little bit. And as these suburban areas get older, they're going to be a bigger redevelopment challenge. And we're seeing that with dead malls and a lot of struggling suburban areas. There's growing poverty in these areas, and it's a challenge. And, when I talked to the mayor of Cincinnati a couple years ago, he's now thinking, well, gosh, with downtowns and density coming back, I'm glad we don't have all that suburban area inside our city limits, because all we're going to have is basically the stuff that's in favor today. So I think that will be one. And then I think lastly, I would say, it's going to need to be a focus for you to integrate many of your new immigrant communities into a region that has historically not been that diverse, and where the pathways to immigrant success are not quite as well established as they are in places like New York. So how do you deal with that kind of diversification of the community and immigrant groups is going to be a challenge as people migrate to economic opportunity, which is what you have here. So those are a few things I'd like to put on the table. But although like every city, you have your challenges, the backdrop, I say, is Columbus seems to be doing very well. You want to get the details on how you're going to be doing next year? Come talk to Bill at the next meeting. He's the real deal. I've been following his work for a while, so I'd second the pitch for that. But you should feel very good about the journey that you've been on. You should feel very good. I mean, you've come a long way as a city in the last 20, 30 years. You're on a great track. I think the future you should feel very good about, and you should feel very good about what you've accomplished as well. So with that, I will just plan on migrating over and having a chat with Kyle.
By the way, While Aaron's miking up, I'll remind everyone, as Debbie Rosenthal reminded me, his discussion in 2010 is available on YouTube. Debbie said it was remarkably on target. So I invite everyone to review that and come to hopefully the same conclusion. You spoke of the city killing it.
Yeah.
I'm going to hire you as our consultant. You said you need to decide what we need to be. What should we be? Aaron, what should we be and how do we get there?
That's only a, how you get to it. I can talk a little bit about the how. You have to decide on the what. Right? I can't tell you, it's just like I say, what career should I do? I can't necessarily tell you the what you should do. But if you tell me what you'd like to achieve, I can tell you more about how I might think about going about doing it.
The consultant. So there's more money involved in getting this answer from you.
Well, you've got me for another 20, so we can talk about some of this right now.
Well, very quickly, I do want to hear one thing from you, and that is that you mentioned, again, we're killing it. And it seems like every month I'm getting something from Michael Brown about a new achievement that Columbus has been recognized for. What are people outside of the city, when you're touring, saying about Columbus?
Now, I would say that, much like your previous marketing studies have shown, and this is somewhat related to the migration stats, right now I'd say Columbus is pretty much a little bit of a cipher or a neutral in the broader marketplace. A lot of people out there in the country really don't know that much about Columbus. Now, you might think that's a bad thing, but in some ways that's a good thing. There are places that people know things about that are very negative. So you talk about Cleveland to people, they've heard of Cleveland, they're like the river caught on fire, right? That's what they think about Cleveland. And there's a lot of great stuff going on in Cleveland right now, but what people want to talk about is the river catching on fire. Probably, I think it was caught on fire before I was even born, okay? So the fact that you start with nothing is, I think, in many ways a good thing because you can build your reputation in the marketplace. I was actually at a conference out in the Bay Area not that long ago on cities, and people were talking about this smart city challenge that you guys won. Now, that was a very high-profile national competition. It was something that's in a space that's very hot. People are talking about future of transportation. And I believe someone from Columbus was actually on a panel talking a little bit about what you were doing. And I will admit, I don't even really know what this is. What are you going to do with the money? I couldn't tell you. But I do know that you won. And I do know that I've seen a lot of references to it, and I do know that it's cool. And so that right there is something that's getting a lot of the buzz out in the marketplace. And I think that kind of illustrates a little bit about what you have to do to get traction in a broader marketplace. Because you have to you have to do something that's first, you have to do something that's unique, you have to do something that's a little bit different. What I would say is Columbus has excelled at execution. It's excelled at getting the basics right. But historically, there aren't necessarily, I don't see a lot of things in this community that are just really out there, cutting against the grain, very going off in a different direction, the sorts of things that are really going to grab people's attention. It's interesting when I talk to people about a lot of the projects that you've done in recent years, the way that I hear them describe them locally is, well, we were inspired by this by Bryant Park. We were inspired by this by Millennium Park in Chicago. And I hear about a lot of the inspirations for a lot of these projects have actually come from outside, and they've been adapted. They're not clones. They're done very well. But a lot of the things that have happened in Columbus are things that were sort of modeled on things that have happened elsewhere, or they're similar to things that are going on elsewhere. I mean, the reality is, right, there's an apartment boom going on in most cities about the same size as Columbus. And you have to look at this in terms of, okay, I think our accomplishments are great, but you go talk to someone from Milwaukee, that guy in Milwaukee, he's got a story about Milwaukee he's trying to get out there in the marketplace. And he's going to talk about the exciting things that have been going on in Milwaukee. So you really have to kind of push over the top into something that is more unique, more differentiated. The more different you are, right, as a city, the easier it is to get market attention. And that's what I've kind of noticed, that while every company tries its hardest to tell you how much different and better it is than every other company. Every city basically tries its hardest to tell you how it's exactly the same as every other city that's conventionally considered cool, right? Apple says what? Think different. Most cities say, hey, we've got tech startups here, we've got coffee shops, we've got microbreweries, we've got this, we have apartment. They're trying to show you that you've got everything that would appeal to the creative class. And I think that's an important thing to do when you're a city that people might think has none of that. Those are all good things, but they don't create marketplace impact right out there. So you want people to do something wow. What you want to do, if you want to get national attention and you want people to pay attention to the brand of Columbus in the marketplace, you have to do the thing that in other cities, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're going to be saying, hey, we did this project. It's sort of a riff on what they did in Columbus. And you have the opportunity to do that with the Smart City Challenge. And that's one where I think a little bit, I'm not sure that honestly is part of the DNA of your city. This has been a city that's been very much, is this the one that's like the test market capital, right, of the country, where it's like, we are representative of the country, that's who we are. We have a very, I maybe do my armchair pop psychology of the city. I don't know if this is true, but I would like to imagine that it is, that kind of the legacy of Ohio State football shaped how you think about winning as a city. In terms of it's about the basics, blocking and tackling. It's not about throwing the long bomb. And so I think that idea is, that's what you say, you execute extremely well. You take care of all the basics extremely well. Is this a city that's going to really get out of the comfort zone and do something highly risky, highly different, something that's not where the market is going? That's very difficult to do. The cities that have kind of differentiated themselves in some ways have done that. And one of them, and you guys say, well, gosh, what would we do? What would we do? Well, I can't tell you what you would do, but I would suggest that there are probably things in this community already in your history that you have that could be built on to differentiate that. And the example I always like to use is Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee is known for what? Country music. Now, if you would have said to someone 30 years ago, our brand is country music, and we want to be a big national brand success, I would have said you're nuts. Like, that's a terrible brand. Right? It's like an anti-brand. That's a negative brand. But you know what they said? They said that to their great credit, they said to themselves, you know what? That's who we are. That is who we are. That's us. We need to own who we are. And we're going to embrace country music. We're not going to reject country music. Now, you'll notice that what they did, they've updated country music for the 21st century. It's not hee-haw and Minnie Pearl and all that anymore. It's more like Carrie Underwood or all these more glitzy, Nash Vegas, they like to call it. It's very slick. But it's still recognizably country music, and it's still recognizingly the evolution of that sort of thing. So by having the courage to embrace who they were as a city in their past, even where it seemed very negative, I think gave them an ability to create a brand resonance. And I'll just say, that is something that southern cities have been very good at doing. For whatever reason, you would think the South is not really the place that had the greatest brand going in the marketplace. But they're very proud of being Southerners. And when Atlanta built itself, we're going to be the capital of the new South. And they said, yes, we're going to change some things about the South. We're going to get rid of some of the racism. We're going to get rid of this and that. But we're not going to deny that we're a southern city. I think what we see in the Midwest is we have cities, this is a very, very common trait, that have a deep sense of shame about who they are. They're tremendously embarrassed and ashamed of what they are as a city. I see this all the time in Indianapolis. There was a time in Indianapolis where nobody there would ever want to talk about the Indianapolis 500. They would just never want to talk about it. And it's like, that's yesterday. We got to get rid of that. But that's like the one thing everybody knows about your city, right? So I think that there's some of that, and thinking about what are the things that you have in this city that you could build on and you could do, that there are things you're actually ashamed of. And is it possible to find the civic courage to embrace them? That's it. Do I have a couple more minutes, or we gotta get?
Go right ahead.
I'm gonna hit you with a pie in the face on this one. And this is one of the things that's like, a lot of the people I talk to, it's like back in 20, 30 years ago, everybody thought we were Cowtown. Right? We thought we were Cowtown. The Mayor Coleman told me he thought Cowtown was a dirty word. I don't want to hear that word. Indianapolis has the same thing around Naptown. Just it's like a nuclear reaction. People just have a visceral, emotional response to it. But I think about, what was so much of hipster culture that came out of Brooklyn? It was basically Midwestern, working class, blue collar, and agricultural culture. It was people sitting around in workwear-inspired shirts, drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon, making pickles, canning, curing their own meats, all that stuff. I'm like, we canned when I was a kid. We canned. Pabst was my dad's brand. I could not get away from that fast enough. I was embarrassed. I'm living in Chicago. I'm like, man, canning tomatoes, that's stupid. I never did. But now, of course, these guys in Brooklyn, they didn't have the emotional baggage around that. And they were able to embrace it in a new way. And really, why couldn't the Midwest have done that themselves? And I think about this idea is like Columbus could have owned urban agriculture, local food. That's the heritage of this region. You guys, this is something that could have been owned in this region. There's probably a lot of other things that could have been owned and maybe owned in the future that it's psychologically difficult to own in the Midwest.
So we've learned that Columbus was hip before Brooklyn.
Right? Right?
That's a good bumper sticker.
Yeah.
You talked about the people going to Brooklyn, however, were not Brooklynites. They
Right.
came from somewhere else. It seems that the Midwestern cities are attracting people from their states,
Right.
whereas the Southeast from across the nation. Does it take someone from the outside to discover what we're not seeing?
I think there's a sense of yes and no to that. One, often it does take a pair of fresh eyes that are unencumbered with the emotional baggage of something to see its potential. Outsiders can definitely do that. A lot of times, too, one thing I will say, it would truly astonish you. I lived for a while in Providence, Rhode Island. You know what the first question everybody in Providence asked me? Why did you move to Providence, Rhode Island? Why in the world would you have moved to Providence, Rhode Island? No one, strangely enough, has ever asked me why I moved to New York. It's just assumed that you wanted to be in New York. And so there's a sense of when you move to a city that's sort of outside of the most hip and cool, you have to, as an outsider, justify your existence, why I'm there. So often the outsiders become the greatest evangelists of your city. Well, let me tell you why I came to Columbus. Let me tell you how great this place is. They actually tend to extol the virtues of a city more than the people who live here. But if you don't have a lot of outsiders, that can still happen naturally in your community, because I think a lot of times young people in these Midwest cities are the ones who see the city with fresh eyes. A lot of the older generation, so I'm Generation X, and that's kind of the fulcrum point. I see both sides of this. The older generations, they remember the deindustrialization, they remember the decline. They're the ones who used to go shopping at the downtown department stores, right? And their mother would take them with the white gloves for tea, and all that stuff that their community lost is as there was this meltdown, and a lot of that is where the shame kind of comes from. Well, if you're someone in your 20s and you're in one of these cities, you're in Cleveland, you're in Cincinnati, you're in Columbus, you know a completely different story arc of your city. You've known a city that's actually going up and getting better, and they're very enthusiastic about where the city's going. They're not stuck in this psychology of the past. And the analogy I like to use is that the generation that leaves Egypt can never enter the promised land. Right? It's sort of like in the biblical story of the Exodus. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. They left Egypt, and they're on this journey to this land of milk and honey. But that generation that was in Egypt, that had the courage, that generation had the courage to actually embark on that journey, a very difficult journey. yet could not their psychology was still bound up in Egypt and were unable to go in and fully possess the promised land. It took the next generation to, it's a 2-generation task to bring you from X to Y. Kind of one group of people has a psychology that starts and does a lot of the really hard, terrible work. And then the 20-somethings get to come in and do the harvesting. And they basically get to come in and do the fun stuff. And these people now, I think, often are very, very, very enthusiastic and see the things of the city. To them, they've never heard of Cowtown. If you hadn't told them, they would never have heard of it. They would never have thought of it. So I think that there's a sense of they look at the city with fresh eyes.
It's a CMC tradition to take questions. I've got one final for Aaron, and then we'd invite questions from the audience. My final question is this. Is there anything we should avoid doing at all cost?
Don't run up any unfunded liabilities. That would be my say. Cities, once you acquire a massive unfunded pension liability or something of that nature, it is very, very difficult to get out from under it. And once your pensions become so underfunded, you basically can't ever catch up. So there are a lot of places in America. I don't know if you've been reading. Everybody loves to talk about how great Texas is doing. Have you been reading about Dallas, Texas may go bankrupt? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I mean their police and fire pensions are in a terrible, terrible, terrible shape. So I would say this is where kind of the red state tradition can help you a little bit. You have to keep a firm eye on the civic finances and not overextend yourself, because you can really, really do yourself a lot of harm.
And I don't see a question yet, so and the microphone is over there, I believe. You're to line up, correct? Andrew? While people are lining up, one other question for you. Columbus is and we'll make it a very brief answer. Yeah. Columbus is a very progressive city in a very conservative state. Mm-hmm. Does that contrast prove problematic for growth?
No. And, we can get in arguments over who's right or who's wrong on national politics. And I hear all the time in people in Midwest cities that these state policies are going to kill us. Well, I will tell you, the Texas legislature is very red, and Austin is very blue, and Austin has been doing extremely, extremely well. And so you go to some of these places, and I would just say, look, if the fact that Texas is a deep red state hasn't stopped deep blue Austin from being successful, I don't think you have anything to worry about.
Great, thank you. By the way, please state your name, ask your question, and thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments.
That's my job.
Yes, my name is John McKnight. I work for Rife's Auto Body here in Columbus, and we've got locations in Grandview and in Westerville, 2 great little communities in Columbus.
I live. No one advertise either.
No, okay, no, too late. I live in Clintonville, which is another wonderful small community in Columbus, and I really like the diversity of all these communities, but it seems like more and more they're all kind of growing similar to each other. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting at a table next to a gentleman with Chipotle, and I love that there's a Chipotle in my neighborhood, yet it just seems like not Chipotle, but so many of the neighborhoods are just bringing in the same architecture, the same franchise restaurants, and are we at risk of losing, our identity? Is the whole city of Columbus, or the whole country for that matter, kind of just trying to do what's popular and we're all going to become the same?
I think that's a great question. And I think there is a danger of that, because trends get hot and everybody wants to copy them. And the analogy, I look at a metropolitan area as like a football team. Everybody, not everybody can be the quarterback. Not everybody is the linebacker. But everybody has a role on the team, and everybody needs to bring their A game for that team to win the game. And, to the extent that everybody's playing the same role or trying to play the same role, so first off, some of them aren't going to succeed. That's going to be bad. And secondly, it's going to limit your appeal as a region, because you want to have different kinds of people are going to be attracted to different kinds of things. So I always encourage neighborhoods within your city, suburbs, to think about how do we differentiate ourselves kind of a little bit within the region, taking this Columbus national thing to the next level. I do think having a diversity of community types within your region is a powerful thing. And I think it is something to worry about a little bit as certain development trends get hot. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Shoshana Goldberg-Miller, and I'm a professor at The Ohio State University. So my question is that I just got done teaching a class of undergraduates, and it was called Arts and Entertainment Planning. So these about 20-year-olds, who most of them said that they would leave the city after they graduated, we spent a lot of time thinking about the brand of Columbus and kind of what that stood for. And my class came up with 4 things, and it's all F. Football, fashion, because we are the 3rd largest fashion capital in the country, fast foods, and festivals. We are the #1 festival city in the country. So my question to you is, how could we, kind of off the top of your head, start to leverage those kinds of attributes to really build our brand?
I think those are good. I like the way you think of it. A lot of people talk about the 3 Fs, like food, fashion, furniture, as like these creative industries. But the reality is they might have one company of each, And you do have a lot. The 2 that I find very intriguing, especially, are fast food and football. I think those, especially college football, I think there probably aren't a lot of cities out there that are saying we're going to go after the fast food business. But you already have a lot of fast food businesses based in this city. You know a lot about that kind of restaurant. What could you do with that, right? How could this, there's probably a lot that could be done with that as a city. I would also say college football, college football is it's like fun stuff, it's a big deal. I think there's nothing wrong with saying football. I think a lot of times when you have something like that you're really known for, Ohio State football, you're like, gosh, we don't want to be known as the one-trick pony. And so I think that's something, how do you really make that something? Those are 2 that I find, I think those have like big opportunity areas. I think it's harder to differentiate on festivals because most cities have a lot of festivals, but I think those are 2 that probably have less competition. You could probably think more about how would I reposition that as an asset?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. Thank you for being here, Aaron. My question is sort of a riff on some of the stuff that you were talking about, and especially benchmarking us against other places and so forth. I've always been a little hesitant about that simply because it's kind of like putting on somebody else's shoes.
Right.
I've been intrigued by the idea of using kind of the local past in order to place make, to create unique spaces, unique experiences that may harken back to the past but be relevant for the present. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to talk about that for a minute.
I agree. I do think there is a sense of, I do think you want to benchmark against the marketplace. I do think you want to know what's out there in the market, but it is very difficult. I mean, Portland is a very different city than Columbus, so you can't necessarily use other people's success for you. But of course, you want to see where you stand in the league tables on various things. I do think you've got in the city, a number of great neighborhoods with a lot of potential. You get some that you already know are like marquee areas like German Village. That's just like, wow, this is like, I would say from a national basis, this is a great historic neighborhood. I think you could compete with much of the great cities of America in having a neighborhood like that. There are other ones that probably have potential that could be developed, but again, they're not going to look just like German Village. They're not going to look just like Short North. How do you basically strengthen kind of what's there? Maybe around some of the legacy of what was in the past. I don't know enough about your neighborhoods to say it, but I do think this idea of creating something that's authentic, deep-rooted in the place and the culture is very important and tying to the past. And again, as you say, I want to be the best version of me that I can be, not a poor man's version of somebody else. And as I like to say, you can't try to beat somebody else at their game. You have to make them beat you at your game. And so what is Columbus's game? What is this my neighborhood's game? What can we do that's really best for us? That's kind of how I would think of it. But the way that you think about that, I really agree with. So I wish I had more specific thoughts, but I unfortunately don't.
If you come with them, give us a call.
Right.
Thank you very much for your talk today. I'm Amy Claben with Strategic Opportunities here in Columbus. You talked about the apartment boom, and it's going on here in Columbus, well, in our region, Central Ohio. A lot of apartments are being built. Many of them are high-end. What are other communities doing for addressing the affordable housing issue so that everybody in our community can thrive? And what are other communities doing to create a region of inclusive growth?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, if you look at the research around gentrification, kind of semi-related to the gentrification topic, most of the research suggests that there's been virtually no displacement of existing residents in most neighborhoods. That's even in Brooklyn. Even in Williamsburg, most of the existing residents were not displaced. It was new people coming in. And affordable housing is a big deal in a place like New York or in San Francisco, where the average cost is very high consistently across the city. I would probably say here in Columbus, like most Midwest cities, you probably have extremely cheap housing in many parts of the city. So the question is not is housing affordable, is there an affordable place, for and a lot of times, I mean, honestly, some of it's just like, I'm a 20-year-old with a college degree. I would love to live downtown. I can't afford it. So there's some of that. I think that generates a lot of noise. So I don't think that the construction of high-end apartments is as big a deal in a community like Columbus, where there is tremendous housing supply at many, many, many price points already in the market. To the extent that other places, have looked at affordable housing, similar types of places tend to do a lot of, probably everything you would do here, low-income tax credit housing and many things of that nature. There has been a focus on trying to construct new, so higher quality housing. But I think that the housing challenge, price challenge, is a little different in a place like Columbus that is in some of the headline cities. Where I think where a little bit of a proxy I think is correct is that a lot of times it's a psychological thing. It's our focus is on the high end of the market as a city. We're trying to build for the high end, attract the highly educated, attract the creative class. That's what cities have been focused on doing. I think that's been an important thing because you need to be in that game. But I do think just as a general civic development mindset, there needs to be a little bit of a shift now that we've sort of achieved a little critical mass in terms of millennials with college degrees and things of that nature. The civic focus, I think, in most places needs to be shifting more as, okay, how do we provide more opportunities economically and otherwise for the middle class, for the poor, for immigrant communities, et cetera. The creative class has gotten a lot of love in America for the last 20 years. And at some point, they can't monopolize the attention forever. You got to have some of that because you do need people here who are choice consumers in order to contribute to the tax base. But you can't just focus exclusively on that. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Well, thank you for addressing the issue of the working class, because people at the lower end of the wage scale, middle and lower, don't have housing in many of our suburbs.
Right.
And so that's an issue to create inclusive communities for everybody throughout the community. And there are many areas within our city that are still not affordable to many working people. So we need decent quality housing to attract all kinds of workers for economic development of our community.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for a lot of that, I would say part of it is the price of housing is not objectively high in Columbus. It's an income issue. We have people with a lot of times we need to raise people's incomes, then they can afford to buy better homes. So I think there's two ways to look at that. I think a lot of times we focus on the housing costs. I think we need to focus, we've had an income challenge in America.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with the Pizzuti Companies. I was intrigued by part of your opening remarks about how Ohio is basically stagnant on population. Columbus is growing, so and largely we're pulling population from other places in Ohio. There are many who, over many years, have said that Columbus gets unfair advantage to all the other cities and they should get what we get and then everything would be fine. My question is, if Columbus weren't as successful as it is, would Ohio be losing population rather than stagnant? And do we need to change the nature of that conversation?
The answer is yes. This is a huge topic that unfortunately I don't think we're going to have time to do as much justice with as we might like. I'll probably spend 10 minutes talking about this one. It's a huge issue. You see the same thing in Indiana. People talk about Indianapolis versus the state. And I think what we've seen is these cities that have 1 million to 1.5 million plus people, the 3 Cs in Ohio, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, these kinds of cities are actually doing okay. And they've got the critical mass, they've got the airports, they've got the educational institutions, they've got the critical mass and the thick labor markets that are going to enable them to do okay. A lot of other places have kind of struggled. Now, killing off Columbus is not going to make the rest of Ohio come back. But I do think that this divide between Columbus and the rest of the state is not healthy. It creates political dynamics that are not favorable to Columbus. And, in a sense, I mean, I do think when you look at, the people who are moving in a sense, part of Columbus's gain has come from other people's pain, and that there is some push of people out of these communities. And a lot of them are like, well, where could we go? We're going to go to Columbus. We're going to go to Cincinnati. We're going to go to Cleveland. So I do think changing that, and the reality is your brand Ohio is part of your brand. So it would behoove, because we saw this election, these divides are going to be a challenge, particularly in a state where, let's be honest, Ohio is a minority of the state's population. Kind of urban progressives are an even greater minority within that. So figuring out how to people like to talk about metropolitan areas being the engine of the state's economies. Well, an engine needs to have some cars attached to the back of it. And I think that an engine that basically powers itself, other people are going to say, I don't care. So it's a hard problem to solve. I don't have all the answers today, but figuring out how to, at a minimum, expand Columbus's sphere of success another 1, 2, 3 counties out. And maybe if Cincinnati can do that, some of what's going on in Northeast Ohio, they can do that. How can you build these other places up? I think is a very important part of your future success, because if if Ohio starts going down the tubes, it's not going to have any positive dynamic for your city in the long term.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron and Kyle, thanks for some great insights, a lot for us to evaluate going forward. I hope everyone enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation with coffee and cookies out in the back and in the hallway there. You can view and share today's forum and all of our other forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on the WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide, through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Again, we want to thank our valuable sponsors, the Design Group, Smith & Hale, the Ohio State University, the Robert Weiler Company, Taft Law, Lusk Architecture, Edge Group, Katz Development, the Whitman Company, and of course our speakers, Kyle Katz and Aaron Renn. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you in 2017.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks.